Welcome to another episode of Beyond Four Walls, the podcast that delves into the world of housing, block management, and the stories that unfold within the confines of a property. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Vanessa White, a breakup and divorce coach who brings a unique perspective to the impact of life events on housing decisions. And Vanessa is not only well versed in the emotional and practical aspects of navigating breakups and divorces, she's also understanding around those transitions that can significantly influence individuals' choices regarding their living arrangements. So join us today as we welcome Vanessa White. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
Hi, Jodie. Thank you very much for having me.
No
Pleasure.
problem at all. So you're a breakup and divorce coach. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and what sparked your interest.
Yeah, sure. For those of you that don't know the work of a breakup and divorce coach, I see clients one-to-one and I help them navigate the process of separation and divorce. Some clients come before they've even chosen to separate and they're looking for some strategies with which to do that in the most stress-free way that you can, if there is such a thing. Or I have clients who come after they've actually separated and are going through the formal process or divorce, and they're looking for the emotional support, they're looking for practical steps, someone to hold their hand through that process when they're also seeing lawyers and maybe financial advisors who are giving them the kind of information so they can make good decisions. And I work alongside them to help keep them going forward and also to kind of plan the life they want ahead, which I think is really important. You know, the divorce or the separation is not the end of the story. For me, it's only the start. So actually helping them navigate the journey forwards and what they want out of life is really, really important.
So in terms of these life events, if you like, on people's housing decisions, have you come across people who they don't want to move out of their home because obviously it's their home that they've built, but they don't feel safe there particularly anymore, or anything like that? How do the impacts of these events affect housing decisions?
Massively. I think it cannot be underestimated the impact on how you feel with where you live. And I think when somebody is going through any kind of end of a relationship, where they then live and how they need to move forward is critical. You're right when you say that a lot of clients that I see, particularly if they've got children, they don't want to move out of the family home, mainly because they worry about the impact that's going to have actually on the children. And they want things to kind of stay the same and for not a lot to change on a sort of real everyday level. And so that's a big one I see, that a lot of people want to stay. Initially, they think they want to stay in the family home. Other people cannot wait to get out of the family home and have a new environment. You know, if a client has been subject to a toxic or abusive relationship, which sadly I see a lot of, people are desperate to get out of those four walls and get somewhere new. And some people have to flee the safety of their home while they're going through this process because they're just not safe there. So the complexities of living arrangements when you're going through the breakup of a relationship are huge.
Yeah, and how do you help people through making those choices?
Any decision that a client of mine makes is their decision. So that's to do with housing or any element of their issue. And my role is really to help them to explore lots of different avenues and maybe think in ways that they haven't thought when they've just been kind of sitting at home on their own, or they're talking to their friends and family who may be supportive, but they're very closely linked to that person. So I bring a kind of non-emotional third-party view and I help them explore all sorts of different options. So we would talk about the reasons really behind why they sort of might be quite blanketed about we want to stay in the family home, because very often when you start unpicking those kind of blanket statements, actually that's not really what they want, but they don't know what else is out there or what other choices there are. So I delve much deeper and I ask a lot of questions. And by doing that, obviously, it makes my client reflect on things in their mind, because as we're sort of thinking and answering questions and we're sort of being asked things that perhaps other people don't ask us, you then do reflect and sort of question yourself of, why am I thinking that? Why am I so set on staying in the family home? I think the other thing to say, that obviously housing is so linked with finances, and I think that's a really big one, that both of those kind of go hand in hand for me.
As a mother myself, I would look at my home not just as my safe space, but that of my daughter as well. So if I were to go through anything like that, obviously, hopefully not, but if I were to go through anything like that, I would probably think about my daughter in the first instance. This is where she's grown up and it's where she feels safe, and that sort of thing. And I would maybe put my feelings aside. So do you help people with, as you said, like bringing out what they actually want? And but do you see the a difference between those who are married and those who aren't married but obviously still breaking up, still going through the emotional side of things? Is there a difference?
I think being married is interesting, because obviously it gives you that sort of contract, I suppose, and that legally binding connection with somebody. I would say, in terms of how people feel when they're breaking up from a relationship, in terms of your emotions, it doesn't matter whether you're married or you're unmarried. And if some people have been with their partner maybe for 20, 30 years and they're not married, but they are so inextricably linked that, they just haven't got a legally binding contract, and you can't kind of lessen the feelings and emotions of somebody who's not married. And I see people actually younger people who maybe have been in quite a short relationship relatively, and they've lived together, and they have then broken up, and the sense of loss, the emotion that is going alongside that are massive. You would think sometimes they've been married for kind of 30 years. It's so individual, and depending on, it's about the emotional connection you have with your partner. And if that is very strong, and it can be strong with people who have been together for a relatively short time but are very, very serious together, or people who've been married for decades, and therefore you're still dealing with the same kind of level of emotion, and people are sort of thinking in the same way about the impact of the breakup on their lives, and in this case, where they live and their housing.
Do you have any advice then around anybody who might be coming to you about, this is happening in my relationship, I don't really know what to do, maybe hesitant about making certain housing decisions?
Yeah, I'm a massive advocate of getting clarity and being really informed. I think there is nothing more beneficial than kind of being armed with all the information and getting the information from people who really know what they're talking about and can give you the best advice. So I really strongly recommend to clients, that if someone's coming and they're sort of thinking that their relationship may be ending and they're not sure what the next steps are, and if they're talking about housing, and if people have got a joint mortgage together, it's those sorts of things that cause a lot of anxiety for people and puts them off kind of pursuing, actually going down the road of breaking up, when actually that is the right thing for them to do. So I always advise them to find out, and they can do that before the event. So find out, how much your property's worth. If people are sort of thinking they want to know how much money they're going to get from the property, how much equity is in the property, getting valuations are really sensible thing to do. Talking to your mortgage company potentially, so that you can see what's left on the mortgage. A lot of people, particularly the person in the couple who is not the breadwinner, they are very fearful of what moving will mean for them. So if they think they don't bring in a lot of money to the relationship, and yet they're going to have to go and try and find a mortgage of their own, that brings huge anxiety, and again can be a barrier for people to actually make the right decision for them about sort of ending the relationship. So I would say talk to a financial advisor so they can look at your finances and maybe what you could get if you were trying to buy a house on your own level. Get armed with all that information so that, you know, even if you sort of think the information isn't necessarily what you wanted to hear, at least you know what it is and you can then take some action from that and you kind of know where you stand. I'm massively pro kind of getting clarity and getting information from people who can really tell you the facts.
Am I right in saying that a lot of your work is around domestic abuse and, you know, coercive control, which obviously I'm a big advocate for safety, and I work with Holly Gaz I Trust, as you know. Obviously, there's a lot of fear around people who are fleeing abusive relationships. Can you give any advice to people who may be looking for alternative accommodation? Do you work with any, you know, women's refuge places or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've got a specialism in domestic abuse, so it's cause very, very close to my heart. I have my own lived experience of domestic abuse. Yes, it's very, very important that we kind of raise awareness about it and talk about it actually in every context. And I would say, unfortunately, statistics show that for people in domestic abuse situations, they are at greatest risk when they terminate a relationship or just afterwards. And that is obviously incredibly frightening. And so, even more so, I would say having your ducks in a row, if you are able to plan for leaving that sort of relationship, you know, like you rightly said, not everyone can plan. Some people have to get out quickly and immediately, and that's obviously a slightly different situation. But if you can have some planning, you know you're in a domestic abuse relationship and you know you are going to end it, then I think getting yourself straight and having your options all laid out, knowing where you're going to go is absolutely paramount, because you're right, safety is the number one concern for you, and if you've got children, obviously for them too. If you need emergency help with accommodation when you're in a domestic abuse situation, absolutely reach out to your local charity. All areas have a local domestic abuse charity. Reach out to them and see what they can provide in terms of refuge and safety for you. If you're planning and sort of leaving a relationship, then I would say, you know, looking at your finances and what you can afford and having somewhere lined up for you to go, I think would be, you know, sensible in an ideal world. You know, if you've got some friends and family that are aware of your situation and, you know, you can talk to in confidence, really, because you don't want to obviously be necessarily telling your partner, obviously, what you're planning on doing. But I think it does help to have support from people. So if you've got some people, some confidants in your circle that can help you, or if you need to go and stay with friends and family, if you haven't got accommodation or you can't afford to find accommodation before you've kind of sorted out the separation and things, then I would say seek help and support from people who you know you can trust.
It must be so hard if you're that isolated. Myself and the trust are actually looking at how we can help property managers like myself to spot signs that somebody might be in a domestic abuse relationship. You know, if somebody's contacting us, say the neighbours are contacting us, for example, about a noise complaint, it's not always a noise complaint. It could be that, you know, there's a lot of shouting, there's a lot of banging. Are they arguing? How often are they arguing? Is it something that we need to step in? Do we need to be more aware of it? And I think it's really important. The education around domestic abuse and spotting the signs is incredibly important.
You know, domestic abuse is something that goes on behind closed doors. It's in the shadows, you know, it's in secret a lot of the time. And that makes it incredibly difficult. And we have to, as society, I think, bring it out of the shadows, bring it from behind closed doors. We have to kind of turn and face it, because it is a societal issue, actually. You know, people might think, oh, it's not happening to me, and it's not, you know, but it's happening a lot. And it's so complex. It's I can't begin to tell you how complex. I mean, obviously you know yourself, but how many layers there are to abuse, and it's not a one size fits all. And, particularly like you said, those little signs that, well, is it's just people shouting, or is it actually abusive behavior? And it's really difficult. It's difficult for people with experience to spot sometimes, but we do have to talk about it. We do have to let people know they're not on their own, because as you rightly said, Jodie, it's incredibly isolating. I mean, one of the tactics that abusers use is to isolate the victim from their friends and family. And it's really frightening. And if then people want to leave, they think, well, I've got nowhere to turn because I haven't spoken to my family for 3 years, or I haven't seen my friends for, however long. And it's knowing then where to turn, and the message that they're not alone, that there is somewhere to turn. And I think starting with charities in your area is a good place to start. Finding someone trusted. Maybe there's someone at work that you can talk to, you trust, and you can maybe say what's going on. But finding those avenues where you feel safe is really, really important.
Are there any resources or tools that you can recommend to individuals that are maybe going through breakup and need some guidance, not just around their housing decisions, but just in general?
There's so many. I think the first thing actually generally, and we've just talked about it in relation to domestic abuse, but I think for anybody, actually being supported is one of the first things I would say. And that sounds very kind of wishy-washy and, sort of, but honestly, even if you haven't got an abusive situation, divorce is known to be the second most traumatic life event after death of a loved one. So that kind of shows you where it is in terms of the effect and impact it has on us. So actually having support, and that could be, obviously friends and family from your work. It could be, having a buddy to go to the gym with, having a professional like me. So having a little kind of what I would call a support team around you is actually really, really important. And you might need different people at different times, or different kind of support as it involves. And it kind of includes professionals as well as, just the people in your social circle. That is really important, because there are days when people might be on the floor just crying, thinking, I can't even get out and do anything because they're heartbroken. People who were not expecting a breakup, their partner, I know clients who they thought they were in a happy marriage. Their husband or wife comes in one day and says, I don't want to be married to you anymore. And it is like a bolt out of the blue. Those people are absolutely desperate. They're heartbroken. And so, you need support around you, even if you feel you just want to isolate yourself and kind of cuddle up under a blanket. You actually need to reach out to people. So having that team of people you trust, feel safe with, feel you can cry with, but also you can go out and have a laugh with, that's really important. I think remembering that the emotions will go up and down, it's like a grieving process. So at the initial phases, you actually need to understand it's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. There are so many emotions to do with breakups, guilt, particularly if there's been betrayal in the relationship. And actually feeling those emotions is good. We don't want to kind of stuff them down. We don't want to kind of have coping strategies that are, not particularly healthy. So just being aware of, how you are coping and processing your emotions. A lot of things I see, if we go back to kind of housing, is if somebody's broken up with their partner or their spouse, and all the stuff around them in their house reminds them of that person, that can be incredibly difficult. They go for their morning coffee and they get the mug out that their wife bought them in, when they went to Rome, and, those kinds of things, that then it just sets you right back. And it's those small things. So I would say, look at your environment, actually. If your bedroom you find is a place where you get really quite upset, and that seems to be, move it around, change the furniture around a bit, get some new bedding. Again, it sounds very simple things, but actually those make a difference, because then when you walk in there, you're not immediately reminded of your spouse or your past relationship. If you've always wanted to paint your room, pink, but your spouse didn't want you to, now's the time. So I would actually say there's a lot of triggers that can be in our home environment, and I would definitely be an advocate of trying to change that up a bit so it is not immediately all the same. I think that's actually quite a good tip, because
Yeah.
people get very upset in their home environment.
It kind of leads me on to my next question, actually, around self-care and self-reflection on the decision that you've made. Again, not just around your housing decision, but in general. Do you have any advice to people who, maybe they're making that decision to break up with somebody and knowing it's the right decision, but also feeling that terrible guilt if you've got children, or, can you give any tips on sort of self-care and self-reflection around that?
I think that's a really, really good point, because even if people, like you say, know the decision is right and know for them in the long run that is what they need to do, it's a really, really difficult to kind of rationalize and come to terms with that. And I would say that actually you do need to be kind to yourself. So talk to yourself like you would your best friend. So when you're having those self-doubt thoughts of like, oh, did I do the right thing? Or gosh, everyone's really upset with me. And, I feel like I'm the bad person for ending the relationship. Actually, change that narrative in your head. And so, talk to yourself like you would your friend. Would you be saying those things to your friend if they came to you and said, I've split up with my partner? No, you wouldn't. So why do we do that to ourselves? So the way we talk to ourselves is what we then get stuck in our minds. So I think that is actually really, really important. What you focus on is kind of what you see more of. So if you're thinking all these thoughts, you're going to get more of these negative thoughts. We're in control of our emotions. So when you have those feelings of guilt and worry that you've done the right thing, again, you can change your focus and dial those down. So it's looking then at the positives. And even in the worst breakup, there is always a small positive. It could be you now have the remote control next to you on the sofa instead of your other half. I mean, it's obviously tiny and trivial, but actually there is always something that is the positive, and I think we have to see that. And the kind of antidote to negative emotions, whatever they are, is actually gratitude. And I am a massive advocate for gratitude. And again, you can be grateful for small things. It doesn't have to be great, big, life affirming things, but actually that you wake up, you can look out at your garden, that, the sun's shining today, that I slept right through the night and wasn't awake in the night worrying. Actually, it's all part of that thing of seeing the positives. You then start focusing them on the more, and you feel better. So I think you can think about gratitude just as and when, or you can make it a practice so that when you wake up and you're lying in bed before you get up, just think, right, what are 3 things I'm grateful for today? And that consistent practice shifts from the negative emotions to feeling much more upbeat and positive about the situation.
Are you able to share, I mean, obviously don't say names or anything like that, but are you able to share any success stories of individuals who have maybe navigated a challenging housing decision?
I've got lots of success stories.
Good. Yeah, well, obviously.
There's an example I've got of somebody who saw me before they even told their partner that they were breaking up with them. And this was actually an abusive situation. I helped them get all their ducks in a row. So they saw other people as well as seeing me as and when they needed to, got completely straight. They were particularly wanting to stay in the property that they were in, but getting the other person out of it was going to be the challenge. And so they did a lot of work with their mortgage company and also with the financial advisor to really understand, and also how they communicate that to their partner. And I did a lot of kind of role play with them in a way where we had practiced lots of the discussions as they were coming up that they were going to have with their partner. They followed kind of to the letter everything I advised, which was lovely, and they worked through, and they did end the relationship. They did get the other partner out of the property. they resolved the financial issue. And I mean, it sounds very simple. It wasn't as simple as it sounds, but it worked exactly for them in the way that they wanted to, which was actually lovely because they had tried to end the relationship several times before without success. I've got another case where it was a divorce, and with a family, they lived in quite a large house. The lower earner of the relationship thought they wanted to stay in the house because of the children, because they thought it would keep consistency, but really had no clue. I mean, I knew as soon as they spoke to me that they probably wouldn't be able to afford to stay, and it was a large property on their own. And also, it probably would become quite a tie for them in reality, looking after it, the upkeep, the bills. That's what people don't really realize. They sort of see the house, the building, and feel they want to stay there, but they don't really realize when you're looking after that yourself, it's a whole different kettle of fish. And that's one of the things that this person kind of came to realize over the time we were sort of together, that actually it was going to become a noose around their neck rather than this lovely idyllic family home that they thought they had before. We sort of worked on that, and then they actually sold the family home in the end, and moved into another property with their children. And they said it was the best decision they made, actually, even though at the start that was absolutely not what they wanted to do.
It sounds a bit strange to ask a breakup and divorce coach about when people are getting together. But do you think there are any considerations that people should make when they're looking at buying a property or looking at renting a property, in terms of if things were to go a bit south with their relationship? Should there be any specific considerations people should think about before going into buying or renting a property together?
I think that's a really good question. And I mean, I know my title is a breakup and divorce coach, but I do a lot of work with clients actually who are looking to get into healthy relationships. I do a lot of work around dating and how to find that sort of loving relationship that you really want. So it is very pertinent. The housing is not sort of unique in terms of any decision you're making with or about a potential partner that you want to kind of be quite serious with and make a commitment to, is making sure that you have done the checks and balances that I would hope people would when they're going into a relationship anyway. So obviously, if you're going to move in with somebody, you've got to be able to trust them. And one of the things I would say is, we get to know someone over time. And I would be very cautious about moving in with somebody, certainly financially committing in terms of buying a property with someone when you have not known them for very long. There tends to be this thing that everyone wants everything kind of now, and everyone thinks, well, I've known them for a few months and they seem fine and all this. And, actually, we need to give relationships time to develop, because people show us who they are, they show us how they are. It's a massive commitment, particularly if you're buying a property together. And I would say take time before you do that to really get to know that person, because it does take time to really get to know somebody. Listen to your gut instinct. I think we tend to, when there are lots of things off our tick list with somebody that we really like, but there are these nagging things in our gut that are telling us something isn't right, or we don't like certain aspects, we kind of push that away because these other things on our tick list are there. And I would say really try and avoid that, because our gut instinct is there to protect us. And it may not mean you need to not see that person anymore, but there's a warning sign. You need to just be aware of that and think, what is my gut telling me? What's going on here? Do I actually like them as much as I think I do? Or am I in this sort of fairy tale world? So I think take things slow, get to know somebody, build up the trust, and don't rush into living with someone, and certainly committing financially by buying a property with someone when you really don't know them very well. I would really be very cautious.
Before we finish up, can you give any last bit of wisdom or advice for our listeners, maybe?
Um, well, I would like it to be positive, actually. I mean, I'm a massive, massive advocate of healthy, loving relationships. I think there's nothing more wonderful than being in love and having an amazing emotional connection with somebody. And I think that's what we all deserve. And don't lose sight of what you deserve. So don't settle for less than you deserve in love. Go for what you really want. Think about your needs, really, first and foremost, your core needs, and don't abandon those for the sake of somebody else. You are really deserving of happy, healthy love, whoever you are, and go for it. But don't abandon your needs for the sake of anybody.
That's very good advice. Thank you so much. How can people find you if they want to?
I have a website, which is www.vanessawhite.co.uk. I am on LinkedIn, Vanessa White. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, Vanessa White Coaching.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure, our listeners will enjoy it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Jodie. It's been a pleasure.